Story number 1. My wife was working that evening, so I was sitting in my room at the computer. It was late, about 3 in the morning, but I wasn't ready for bed yet. My mother-in-law was at a corporate party celebrating the birthday of the accounting firm she worked for. At the time, we were living as a threesome, with no children. Sometimes I found myself daydreaming about my mother-in-law. Not because it's taboo, because of our close relationship, but simply because she is an incredibly attractive woman. She grooms herself, dresses elegantly, and goes to the gym regularly. Her slim waist emphasizes her graceful figure. Her beautiful face with features reminiscent of a European duchess is framed by long platinum blonde hair. For the party, she wore a black dress that skimmed her trim body and ended above her knees. As I was immersed in thoughts of her, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. When I opened the door, I saw my mother-in-law's coworker, a tall man in a gray jacket with my mother-in-law slung over his shoulder. Her hair was a mess, her dress stained, and her face flushed with a half smile. Her gaze was unfocused and detached, clearly indicating severe intoxication. "Hey, kid," muttered my mother-in-law's coworker. "We had a little celebration, and your mother-in-law drank too much." I could tell from his slurred speech that he was pretty drunk too. They both smelled so strongly of alcohol that my eyes glazed over, and I began to feel intoxicated myself. "Anyway, you help your mother-in-law, get her to bed," he continued. "And I'll go. He gently lifted my mother-in-law off his shoulder and guided her toward the doorway. She wrapped her arms around my neck and snuggled in tight. It wasn't easy as I was quite frail, but I managed to hold on. Meanwhile, I was already stomping up the stairs. With my arm around my mother-in-law's waist and the other hand closing the door, I gently guided her into the bedroom. She obediently headed in the right direction and muttered something like, "Boys, I've had enough." I led her into the room, gently lowered her onto the bed, and took a deep breath. To say I was shocked was an understatement. My mother-in-law had never acted like this before. She had always been reserved, disciplined, and somewhat aloof in public. And now she was lying on the bed, disheveled, in a completely ruined dress and completely unconscious under the influence of alcohol. Yet she still had an incredibly seductive figure that had all the men, including me, drooling. Disturbed, I decided that she just needed to get some sleep. In the morning, she would sort things out and get back to normal. I bent down to her feet, which were still on the floor, and carefully removed her shoes. Then I carefully lifted her right foot and placed it on the bed. And then I froze. When I moved her leg, the dress, already too short, was pulled even higher, revealing a rather revealing sight. At that moment, I was completely stunned. A whirlwind of thoughts raced through my mind. I felt anger at my coworker, whose name I couldn't remember, for getting my mother-in-law drunk and taking advantage of her. I also felt anger at my mother-in-law for allowing this to happen. However, I quickly realized that my mother-in-law was a grown woman, and it was none of my business who she chose to spend her time with, or how she chose to spend her time. She had a sweet smile on her lips, and her eyes looked at me without blinking. I felt uneasy, but upon closer inspection, I noticed that despite her open eyes, she was looking past me, oblivious to her surroundings. After adjusting her clothes, I carefully rolled her onto her side and covered her with a blanket before heading into the bedroom. I was tormented by contradictions. Part of me felt guilty that I hadn't taken advantage of her vulnerability, hoping to keep things quiet. But the stakes were too high, and I knew I'd lose more than I'd gain. For the first time in my life, I felt a sense of pride. The blackjack I earned that night remains a significant accomplishment for me to this day. The next day, early in the morning, my wife left for work. I had the day off, and so I was home. Around 9, and my mother-in-law woke up. She was very shabby looking. I was sitting in the kitchen, drinking coffee. My mother-in-law came in smiling and asked me to pour her some water. After yesterday's holiday, her body demanded fluids. I poured water into a glass. My mother-in-law drank it greedily. I looked carefully, not so much as she drank, but at her body. It fascinated me. I wanted to do something stupid. My mother-in-law attracted me, especially in the morning. In general, I still could not resist, although I gave myself a promise, but I could not resist such beauty. But most importantly, my mother-in-law was not against it, so my dream came true. Story number 2. In the midst of the daily routine in the office and the constant smoke breaks, Frank met Susan. She was like a ray of light at the end of the tunnel in this office routine. A mutual sympathy and then deep feelings arose between them. Now their daily breaks were spent together. The flirting continued during their meetings as well. Very quickly, their relationship grew into something more than just flirting. And a year later, there was a wedding in a blooming country house. And so began a life together. And Frank realized that not everything is not so smooth, although his wife Susan was attractive and sociable, but the hostess was bad. After a while, their house, where it should be cozy, turned into a mess. The mountains of unwashed dishes in the shower room went moldy. All in all, the house was filthy. Dinner at home consisted of something ordered at a restaurant or bought at a diner. Frank held on until the last minute and thought things would get better, but it was getting harder every day. He thought he could do something about the chores around the house because they wouldn't last long without change. But change had come to the couple themselves. It was Frank's mother-in-law, Carolyn. She began to help the newlyweds around the house. Cooking and cleaning were on her. She was a lovely woman, looking very young, with a beautiful smile, and her eyes blazed with fire. As soon as she appeared in the house, everything became nice and familiar. And how she cooked. It was delicious. I never ate anything in my life. Her food was better than in restaurants. So Frank began to admire his mother-in-law because she possessed those virtues that he valued very much. Every time he saw Carolyn, he felt his heart begin to beat faster. This, of course, was noticed by his mother-in-law as well. And as it turned out, it was mutual. Now Carolyn smiled more at her son-in-law, began to dress up. But what to do in such a situation? Feelings are good, but what about fidelity to his wife and morality? It was all very complicated and confusing. And most importantly, how could it affect his life? But after thinking over the pros and cons, he decided to confess his feelings to his mother-in-law, Carolyn. Having plucked up courage, he told his wife everything. He sincerely poured his heart out to her about everything that had come to a boil. The conversation was unpleasant and painful, but allowed the spouses to avoid quarrels and conflicts. Soon they divorced. Frank for some time tried to understand what he should do next, because his feelings for his mother-in-law did not go anywhere. And so he made up his mind and invited Carolyn on a date. Everything was wonderful. Romance, understanding each other from half a word, and it was especially wonderful to wake up next to her. He didn't think long and proposed to Carolyn. And soon, they were expecting a new addition to the family. That's how the guy Frank was not afraid of his feelings for a woman older than him and confessed everything to her, which led him to happiness and harmony in the family. When Frank and Carolyn embarked on a new journey together, their love became even deeper and stronger. Their bond was built on a foundation of trust, respect, and unwavering devotion, creating the sense of harmony and fulfillment they both craved. Their decision to be together was fraught with challenges and obstacles, but their love and commitment to each other remained unwavering. As they waited for the arrival of a new family member, their hearts were filled with joy and anticipation, and they knew that their love would only grow stronger with each passing day. Frank and Carolyn's unconventional love story was a testament to the power of honesty, courage, and the transformative nature of love. They looked to the future hand in hand and knew that their bond was unbreakable, their love unwavering, and their happiness undeniable. And when a child was born, they became happy parents. Some neighbors to this day look at them with contempt because of the age difference. But this is the problem of the people themselves. The main thing is that they are happy, and they do not care what passersby think about them. Story number 3. My mother-in-law, Nancy, always showed me favor. She was always hugging me, complimenting me on my looks, and telling me how pleased she was that I was her son-in-law, and that if it weren't for her daughter, she would have married me. When I told my wife Jennifer about this, she didn't believe it and accused me of making it all up. Despite my attempts to convince her otherwise, Jennifer just laughed at my explanation. She jokingly said that, based on my stories, all girls fall in love with me. Jennifer playfully advised me to stop fooling myself and reminded me that her mom only praised me as a wonderful son-in-law. As Jennifer left to prepare dinner, I couldn't escape the thought that I had misinterpreted Nancy's intentions. However, since she had lived alone for a long time, she couldn't help but be attracted to an attractive man, since she most likely wanted attention for herself. Despite this, my mother-in-law remains quite attractive. Meanwhile, as I was deep in thought, my wife Jennifer had already prepared dinner and called me over to her place. I decided not to bring it up again in the future, as my wife would not believe me anyway. A few weeks later, my wife informed me that she was going on a business trip abroad for about a couple of weeks. To keep me company and keep me from getting bored, she suggested that her mother, Nancy, come and help me. Nancy would take care of the cooking and cleaning. Before I could object or say anything, my wife hurried out of the house with her packed suitcase. As she ran out, I shouted that I would not miss her. It had been 2 days since my wife left. While I was at work, my mother-in-law arrived and cooked meals while caring for 2 chatty parrots. She and I never even crossed paths. However, when I got home Friday night, I found my mother-in-law in the kitchen. She was cooking something delicious. "Hey, handsome," she shouted loudly. "You go take a shower while I prepare the food." "Thanks, Nancy." The drool was already flowing, so I quickly ran to the shower. When I got back to the kitchen, there were steaks and salad waiting for me. After I ate, my mother-in-law stood up and started massaging my shoulders, giving me a massage. "You, son-in-law, relax. Now I'm going to stretch you out. You work from morning till evening. You need to rest. My daughter has left, and you are alone. You must be bored." I was surprised at this development, but I did not object. I began to praise my mother-in-law for the delicious dinner and for the wonderful massage. I relaxed completely. I woke up only when my mother-in-law was already leading me to the bedroom. Mother-in-law turned out to be cunning and waited for her time, and I was just grateful for her care. My wife was on a business trip for another week, and my mother-in-law met me from work every evening. In general, there was no boredom. The day of my wife's arrival from the business trip came, and my mother-in-law and I, of course, went to meet her. Upon arrival, my wife kissed me and then asked me if I missed her. I smiled and replied that with a mom like yours, you will not miss her. We laughed, and then my mother-in-law said, "Listen, daughter, I will steal your husband for tomorrow. I need to repair the doors in the house because they do not close well." Of course, the wife agreed, and the mother-in-law winked at me slyly. The next morning, I went to my mother-in-law's house with a good mood. I was walking down the street and imagined what was waiting for me. My dreams overwhelmed me. I was already thinking what game we would play with her. All these thoughts excited me so much that I did not walk, but ran to her. I wanted to see her so badly. When I came to my mother-in-law's house, there was an unfamiliar car near it. I was very upset. I didn't want my dreams to fail today. When I entered the house, besides my mother-in-law, I was met by another pretty woman. It was her friend. Her name was Pamela. "Hi, handsome," my mother-in-law's friend said, and smiled strangely, and then came over and ran her palm over my face. I was shocked, but my mother-in-law calmed me down. You know what she told me? That we were going to play an interesting game tonight, just the 3 of us. But no, she didn't calm me down. She just decided to fulfill a long-time dream of mine. That's my humble mother-in-law, I thought. The 2 of them have given me heaven on earth. I almost forgot to say that my mother-in-law was 45 years old and her friend 60. but she looked very young. She could not be more than 50 years old, and I was 25 at the time. Our adventures lasted a long time, and now, after a couple of years, sometimes the three of us go out into nature, relax, and do not deny ourselves anything. Life is one you need to try a lot of things. Story number 4. After proposing to her, she accepted and bluntly told me that I should think twice because I would have to get along with her single mom. By marrying her, I was also taking her mom into my custody since they were inseparable. I agreed. A year passed and we got used to living with the three of us, along with her mother. It turned out that my wife Marie was not only very attached to her mother, but was also an avid fan of going to the bathhouse together. At times, I even feared that she loved her mother more than me. However, these thoughts quickly dissipated as I knew that Marie really loved me and would never leave me. Living in harmony with my mother-in-law would only strengthen my relationship with my wife. Visiting my mother once a week, I realized that she was feeling lonely and no longer seeking companionship with men. Sympathizing with her, I took it upon myself to take care of her. Although my mother never visited us, probably because my mother-in-law had a small apartment, we eventually bought a spacious 2-story house with many bedrooms and a bathhouse. Right after we moved, we sold my mother-in-law's apartment to alleviate some of the burden of the loan on the new house. Fortunately, we had a substantial amount of money left over. I was looking forward to relieving myself of this financial burden of debt. After discussing the matter with my family, I made the decision to invite my mom to live with us and sell her apartment. Thus, the move took place and our entire family began to live under one roof. On the first Saturday after Mom's move, we all got together to celebrate the event in the bathhouse. At first, my mother was hesitant, feeling somewhat awkward. However, I assured her that now we are one family and will overcome both joys and difficulties together. My wife, understanding her mother's usual difficulties, decided to help her, and they went to the bath first. Meanwhile, I accompanied my mother-in-law, solving all the remaining issues. While they were steaming, my mother-in-law and I took the opportunity to drink a bottle of wine each and began to have many heart-to-heart conversations, including on the subject of family relations. This topic seemed to put a spark in my mother-in-law's eyes. The reason seemed to be her lack of a boyfriend for an extended period of time. When it was our turn, my mother-in-law hurried to the bathhouse, and I immediately followed her. The atmosphere was pleasant. "Lie down, mother-in-law. I'll wash you now. You will see how useful it is to steam in the bath," I said as I soaped her back. At the same time, my gaze was directed in a certain direction, which did not allow to hide the male admiration. During this process, everything around me seemed hazy. Eventually, my legs gave out, and I collapsed on the bench, completely drained of energy. My mother-in-law expressed her gratitude, calling me cute, and walked out of the bathhouse. I remained seated, slowly coming to my senses. The wine seemed to relax my muscles. I sat and thought about how lucky we were to have our own bathhouse, and how it had become a tradition to steam with my mother-in-law alone. About a week later, after the first bath with my mother-in-law in the bathhouse, we decided to repeat all this. My wife and my mother said that now they would go to town for shopping, and we had to stay alone with my mother-in-law. We should not miss such a moment. It was 20 outside, and we decided to warm up again in the bathhouse. When my mother-in-law found out that we would be alone, she immediately became very cheerful and could not wait until her daughter and my mother left. And now we were alone. The bathhouse was ready to receive us, and we did not waste time and went to wash. When my mother-in-law and I started to play an adult game, and at the most important moment, we heard a bang on the door. It was my wife who saw through the window what we were doing. They did not reach the city, stopped at my mom's friend's, and she stayed there, and my wife came home, forgot some documents. So my mother-in-law and I got caught. My wife went crazy after what she saw, locked the doors, and wanted to set fire to the bathhouse. Probably she would have succeeded if I had not broken the door and grabbed a can of gasoline from her. My mother-in-law was also shocked. first because she had been caught with me, and then because her own daughter wanted to do the wrong thing. After this story, my wife did not speak to us for a week, but everything ended well. We sat down and talked, admitted our mistakes. My wife forgave us, and we forgave her for the fact that, in a fit of anger, she almost made a barbecue with us.